Hello and welcome to another episode of the Haskincast podcast. I am your host, Scott Haskin, here with a fantastic guest who's got a really interesting history and a book coming out that we're going to talk about, and I cannot wait to get into this. He's really concerned now. He put his glasses on and then took them off, so I don't know where we're headed, but it's going to be good. I feel that. Really cool guy. We just met like 5 minutes ago, and already I'm just like dying to get into the interview. Let's welcome him to the show. Nelson Aspen, how are you?
Thanks, Scott. Nice to be here. Thank you for having me. And the glasses on, glasses off thing is because I've reached that age where I really don't need my glasses, but it's on off all day long. It's the most cardiovascular exercise imaginable because it's all day on and off with the glasses. And then it becomes, where did I put my glasses?
Someday I have a feeling that we're going to get to the point where we're going to have like clear glass with a prescription built in, and we'll just say a command and they'll switch on and off. Kind of like, remote control bifocals.
Whatever. I mean, I'm one of the weirdos that my eyesight is improving with age. I was the 8-year-old with the Coke bottle glasses, but now at 61, my vision is actually the best it's ever been. So go figure.
Wow. That's impressive. So
my
you're like
eyes are Benjamin Button eyes.
I was going to say a visual Methuselah, but I like that better. So how are you doing today? You seem like you're in a really good mood. I mean, we've just met, but I kind of get the feeling that you're the kind of guy that takes life pretty easily and just tries to be happy.
Well, yes, I'm an innately happy person.
Good.
My default is to joy, which is a handy way to go through your life. And one of the greatest compliments, and they didn't really mean it as a compliment, but I took it as one, is when some journalist referred to me as Hollywood's happiest personality. And I think that they meant it in a sort of derogatory way, but hey, gay just means to be keenly alive and merry.
That's right. It absolutely does.
That's the Webster's Dictionary definition, I'll have you know.
I like the way that you took that because I kind of feel like it doesn't really matter what people say, it's how we react to it. I mean, some things are obviously hurtful no matter what, but if you could turn something like a negative into a positive, that is one of the greatest ways to live.
Well, you know what? I'm really lucky. I am my parents' child, and now that they're gone, I can fully take over their personalities. I've got all these different personalities fighting for control over me all day and night. And in the morning, I'm usually my mother, and by happy hour, I'm my father. So we all coexist quite well. In addition to the reincarnated soul that's wandering around in there as well.
And you get to keep their memory alive through your natural way.
I don't know how it is for you, but there are moments where I will see a photograph of myself, or I'll catch a glimpse of myself in the mirror, or something will fly out of my mouth, and I'll be like, "Oh my God, that's my mother," or "That's my father," and it's nice because then they're never really gone. They're right at my fingertips.
Right. I'm one of those, I don't know if it's weird, but I really don't like to look at pictures of myself. Like even editing video or things like that, I really have a hard time with it because I'm afraid that I'm going to find a ghost, like some spirit walking by, some weird thing happening in the background. I've been on Zoom calls and had a person's table just kind of like slowly slide across behind them and they're the only one home. So for some reason, I'm really terrified to know that there's a presence here that I don't connect with. And so I tend to kind of shy away from photographs and watching myself on video too much.
Well, I'm an avid runner, and when I was in my prime and running, I ran 20 marathons. So I mean, I was a real serious runner, and I would love to catch a glimpse of myself in a storefront window as I was running by, because I'd be like, "Oh yeah, you're looking good, you're running, you're doing great, you're strong, you're healthy, whatever." And now, I mean, I still run 100 miles a month, but my form is not as attractive as it used to be, and I actually avoid looking in windows as I run down the streets of New York City. I avoid catching a look at myself because I don't want to see the change.
Well, that's got to be tough in New York. There's got to be tons of reflective glass.
Yeah, well, it's important to, here's your number one running tip of the day, Scott. Keep your eyes in front of you when you're running. Don't don't get distracted looking to the side at a window reflection, especially in New York City.
Yeah, I got used to all the years that I lived in Vegas, and I was one of those rare locals that actually wanted to go down to the Strip and walk it from end to end, between 1 and 3 times a week. And I got used to looking more at people and where they were positioned, how fast they were moving, so I could dart around them. Then I kind of just stopped noticing everything else around me. It was a mission to get from point A to point B. But I could definitely see what you mean, like keeping that focus where you need it to be. Plus, I mean, it's a safety issue.
I also have a terrible habit that was pointed out to me when I was an adolescent by a friend of my family's. Was observing me. I was on a cruise, and this friend of the family said to me, "You're always staring. You shouldn't stare at people, and they'll catch you staring." And I, at the time, was and continue to be rather unapologetic about it. I do enjoy studying people, and it's not a sexual thing. It's just a human nature fascination kind of thing. And uh, I suppose it is rude. And when I'm caught staring, I tend to either smile, buy them a drink, or look away somehow. But I like staring at people. I'm a people watcher.
I used to work for a guy who was really interesting. He took me to lunch one time, and it was about 10:30 in the morning, and he said, "Well, it's close enough to noon. I guess we can drink." And he said, "You know, one thing that really bugs me about you, Scott." And I said, "What?" And he says, "You're always staring at me." And I said, "Well, when I'm conversing with a
Yeah.
person, it feels weird to be looking away from them when they're talking to me. Like it felt rude and inconsiderate." But I didn't realize that that actually becomes uncomfortable for some people.
Well, that says a lot about that person. I mean, as opposed to, your parents would say to you, "Look at me when I'm talking to you, young man."
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah. I think you should. I think it's a rather important social skill to look at someone when they're speaking to you,
Thank you. I appreciate hearing
even
that
on an
from
audio
someone.
only podcast.
Yeah, right, right. Well, before we get into the book and your history, I'm kind of curious. How long have you been back in New York?
I moved to New York from my hometown in Pennsylvania immediately after graduating. I skipped a year, so I graduated right before I turned 17. So
Okay.
that was in June, and I moved to New York in August of 1980, at the just having turned 17. I stayed here 10 years, then went to Los Angeles for 22 years. And I'm always fond of saying, 22 years, you get less for murder. And then came back to New York full time in 2012, I think. And I met the love of my life, got married, and now I'm living my happily ever after. So
Wow.
there you go. You just never know. You never know until you do it. Lee Grant, the great actress Lee Grant, wrote an autobiography which she titled "Say Yes," and that I wish I'd thought of it first, because saying yes to things, even if they're outside of your comfort zone, and just taking the chance and what the hell, just say yes, really does pay dividends. I think if you have the, I don't know, the spine to back it up, just
Mhm.
saying yes. You don't know what's going to happen, but chances are it'll be something good.
It's fascinating how many people I've known that have even done that for a day and really committed to it and come out with fascinating results. And I think I don't know that I have the confidence in what people would ask me to do
To say
that
yes
I
to.
would I would ever want to do it again after, like oh God, I wish I had never done that because I tend to get really weird requests from people. But I do admire people who can do that because it's one thing to say you don't get anything in life if you don't ask for it, which is one of my mottos that you just don't. But to say I'm willing to say yes to what everyone else brings to my table,
Yeah, I almost never
that's a
asked
bold
for
decision.
anything.
Yeah.
When you said that, I was like, what have I ever asked for? And I'm thinking, I don't think I've ever asked for anything. But
Wow.
the first one that springs to mind of saying yes was in 1980, maybe seven. I was in between acting jobs, and I had to get some work, and I was having a mad affair with my aerobics instructor, who was
Ooh.
offered a job teaching at a private health spa in Tuscany, and it paid very well. And I was like, well, of course you're going to take it, right? And he's like, no, I'm not going to take it. I have a life here. I'm not going to go to Tuscany for 3 or 6 months or whatever it was. And I was like, well, I would do it. If I could teach aerobics, I would do it. And he's like, let's get you certified. And I became an aerobics instructor, and off I went to Italy. I had this amazing experience. I came back to New York, and I became a full-time fitness instructor. And I was private training Gwen Verdon in Vogue
Wow.
dancing. It was like the Jamie Lee Curtis, John Travolta perfect days
Hmm.
of, it was the zenith of the aerobic craze.
Right.
And I did that for a couple of years, and I was like, well, wait a minute. I didn't come here to be an aerobics instructor. I'm an actor. And that's what propelled me to Los Angeles, where while teaching aerobics in Los Angeles to pay the bills, I was commissioned by a British woman who she worked for the royal family. And I was commissioned to train Princess Diana in that hot new workout of 1990, Step. And off I went to the United Kingdom. Pardon the sirens. This is New York City, after all. So I go off to London to train the princess. I've been vetted and all that stuff. I had my beautiful long mullet and my little tight bike shorts and my step. Most importantly, I had the step. And I got there, and they said, "Oh no, you're going to be training her trainer and the gym staff, not the princess. We've decided that's what you're going to do." But while I was there, I was a guest on the morning show demonstrating the princess's new workout. The people at the morning show liked me, ended up getting hired, and I became the Hollywood correspondent for the #1 British morning show. And I did that for 10 years until
Wow.
the #1 Australian morning show tracked me down and said, would you come work for us? And the time difference is much preferable broadcasting from Los Angeles to broadcasting to Australia. You get out in time for happy hour, but broadcasting
Right.
to London, you were up all night. So I had a
Yes.
30-year career in morning television because I said yes to on a whim to going to Tuscany to teach aerobics. So I mean that's a very long way around of saying yes pays dividends.
I have a concept that I just had to get it out of my system, and I just wrote a concept album about it. But it was if how easily one simple decision, yes or no, could change the course of your life. If you
Mm-hmm.
turn left instead of right, if you stay at the stop sign 3 seconds longer, and it just kind of drove me nuts after a while and starting to overthink every little thing. Well, should I go now? Should I go now? Should I go now? But you don't know where it's going to lead you, so you just have to go with your gut and follow your instincts. But I love that. I love that you had all these opportunities. But I have to ask, did you ever get to meet Princess Di?
No, I didn't. But we had aside from having the same birthday, we had some sort of strange connection. I know. Obviously, she was very well aware of who I was for the mere fact that I trained her staff, and
Right.
then I was on. I was inescapable from morning television for, you know, somewhere along the line, everybody in London and Australia encountered me at some point over the course of all those years. And interestingly, I want to say it was 1997. I've chronicled a lot of these stories in one of my memoirs, but uh, had just bought my first house in Hollywood. I called it the Hollywood Hacienda, and I had friends over for a barbecue, and it was a wild August night. It was hot, and we had a barbecue in the backyard, and we were drinking a lot and carrying on and celebrating moving into the new place. One of my friends was a British journalist, and she got a call. Now remember, this is ostensibly before the internet. I mean, there was a little bit of internet, but it was kind of internet, and
GeoCities.
yeah, and she got a telephone call, on her hot new cellular phone, and it was that Princess Diana had been in this car accident, and could she come into the studio right away to do some reports? But she said, "Look, I've been drinking, I can't drive." And it was an ABC station. They sent over a satellite truck to my driveway, and there were six of us
Wow.
there, and they sat us around. The producer came in, and they said, we were all television people, so they sat us around in a circle of six, so each one of us had a different background, and they were feeding us information as it broke. Okay, you're going to be, Nelson live from Hollywood, and then the other one was live from Los Angeles, and the other one was live from the United States. The fact was, we were all in the same room together, but reporting information as it came to us. And I just thought of the irony that Princess Diana, who, in a weird diagonal kind of way, gave me my broadcast career. Here I was
Right.
reporting on the end of her life that way, and I did. It was a memorable moment, and forever connects me in my own personal way to the princess.
Is that why they didn't just send a car for you guys to come down to the station so that they could break it up and give that kind of perspective
It
of
was just
different
fast.
areas?
It was just faster for them to send a truck
Ah,
rather than deal with a bunch of,
right.
partying
Wow.
journalists. And I remember I had just moved into that house literally that week, and I thought, oh my gosh, what must my new neighbors think that they see this giant satellite truck sitting in my driveway? But I would go on to further embarrass myself.
Well, that's the way to do it. Is it was it difficult to do that broadcast? I that's one thing I think of journalists. I'm always impressed when I remember like watching the Challenger explosion
Mm.
and watching how the media handled that and thinking, God, it must be so hard to be live and report these horrible things that you know are going to affect people. How do you set yourself like your own personal feelings aside to be able to do the
Well,
broadcast?
I'm very cautious and responsible about my journalistic integrity, even though 90% of my reporting life, live and pre recorded, is uh, happy and light and entertainment and pop culture. Although in the last year, I've taken a political bent, which has been fascinating just because it's a change of pace. But the adrenaline of breaking news is a rush that I can't describe as thrilling as it is. And even when it's a disastrous, unhappy occasion of breaking news, the adrenaline rush is what sustains you. And I've had many examples of that over the years, but the most memorable for me, I was live on the air, and it was the day that Farrah Fawcett had passed away. And my big concern was, you know, I'm sort of known for my lighthearted, happy approach to news, but this was somber and serious. So I was, conscious of that. I actually, I put on a tie that day, just the responsibility, the gravity of the situation. Plus, she had passed away of anal cancer, and anal is a difficult word to say on morning television. But when it's
Sure.
the cause of death, it needs to be said. But it's a it's a responsive word. So I was gearing up for my approach to reporting this. I had my earpiece in, I put my microphone on, I'm in the chair talking to the hosts who are in Sydney, Australia. Sad news to report today: Farrah Fawcett of Charlie's Angels fame has passed away at the age of whatever she was from anal cancer. Then I hear a voice in my ear, and it was my producer in Sydney screaming in my ear, "Stop talking about Farrah Fawcett. Michael Jackson's dead. Say Michael Jackson's dead. Michael Jackson just died. Say Michael Jackson died."
Wow.
And I had no this again, whatever year that was. It was a long time before we had phones in our hand, and we to get information, you really needed to work at it. You
Mhm.
couldn't just have it on your phone instantly. And
Right.
he's screaming in my ear that I needed to say this, but as a journalist, I needed to see it for myself. I needed to know that it was true. I
Mhm.
was not going to say it. And he's really repeatedly yelling at me. He's like, he's in an ambulance right now. And meanwhile, my producer in Los Angeles is wheeling in televisions with closed captioning underneath the camera so that I could keep my eye on it. And I did the old sort of TV journalist thing where you put your hand to your ear, like, yeah, I'm getting some breaking news here. And that's what I did. I put my hand to my ear and said, I'm getting some reports in my ear that are unsubstantiated. I'm like basically trying to communicate to the producer in Sydney, hey, dude, get me some confirmation, like, so
Right.
I approached it that way. And we ended up staying, the morning show was like 3.5 hours. We ended up staying on the air 7 hours. I didn't get out of
Wow.
that chair for 7 hours because I was able to, as the story developed and unfolded, and the helicopters over Bel Air and over the hospital, and the craziness of it. But I was able to just keep talking. The gift of gab. But I knew enough about Michael Jackson's career to give it perspective.
Sure.
I take celebrity death very seriously,
Mhm.
and that was I hesitate to say thrilling, but it was a thrilling experience for me as a reporter because it tested all of my skills, and
Mhm.
it was exhilarating. Of course it was sad, but then I spent a year of my life on the road after that doing Michael Jackson stories. I would be at Neverland Ranch. Then there was the trial of Dr. Conrad Murray. There was the trial downtown. There was the funeral at Forest Lawn. There was the memorial service at Staples Center. It was a year of Michael Jackson reporting. But it was fun to be outside of the studio and to get to do those kinds of reports. And yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, we were going to talk about my reincarnation book, but I've written a two-book series that will eventually be three books called Dancing Between the Raindrops,
Mhm.
and that chronicles my life as a entertainment journalist,
Excellent.
from aerobics instructor to entertainment journalist. And the title, Dancing Between the Raindrops, and the sequel, Dancing Between the Raindrops, The Hollywood Years, comes from what my dad used to say when he would marvel at the way I would run around New York City being a wild child and somehow never get hurt. It was the era of AIDS, and I'm just running around from club to club to club and living the life. And he'd say, "You must be dancing between the raindrops." And I never forgot
Interesting.
that. And maybe I haven't just gotten wet yet, but dancing between the raindrops has really been my life. Lucky, lucky.
You know, I've got the link, by the way, to your Amazon page and to the book in the show notes, so everybody go check that
Oh,
out. There's
good.
several books on Amazon right now. But before we dive into the past life stuff, I was on a podcast a few years ago that was hosted by a couple of comedians, and we ended up actually talking mostly about the process that a comedian goes through, where they have so much to pay attention to. It's not just writing and memorizing your routine. You have to be paying attention to how your jokes are going over. You have to keep like a checklist in your head of, does this group in this city like this joke? Does this
Hmm.
race like this joke? There's so many things to keep track of. Journalists are not people that just get up there and read a teleprompter. They have so much they have to pay attention to. There's so much pressure and responsibility. It's amazing how many people actually pull that off really well.
You know who I learned the most from? You have to be of a certain age, but I'm just going to assume that you know who I'm talking about when I say one of my biggest mentors and role models was Regis Philbin.
Mhm.
And when I was very young and first moved to New York, Regis and Kathy Lee Gifford, back then she was Kathy Lee Johnson,
Mhm.
hosted. It was called The Morning Show. It was before they went national. It was just a little
Right.
local New York show called The Morning Show, and New Yorkers. It was kind of an institution around here, and you could just get tickets and go and sit in the audience. And I did often because I knew I wanted to be in television, and watch it. Regis was the master of exactly what you're talking about. He could have his earpiece in and listen to the director and the producer in his ear, but he could also have a conversation with his co-host and his guests, entertain the audience, the studio audience in front of him, while simultaneously knowing which camera was on him and how long he had left before he had to wrap up his segment. He was whether you like Regis, the personality, or not, he was a genius of orchestration. He could
Yeah.
keep all the plates spinning in the air at the same time effortlessly. And it's a
Mhm.
real skill. And incidents like that Michael Jackson story, or when all of a sudden I'm the only guy in the hurricane and they say, Nelson, we need you to go outside and cover the hurricane. And that's fun for me because it's something different. Really? Oh, I get to be in the hurricane? Uh,
Right.
yeah, it's a wonderful way to exercise those muscles.
Yes, absolutely. I thought you were going to say Walter Cronkite, but I understand your choice with Regis. Uh, so I find it fascinating. I am a person who I feel like I've seen enough evidence to say that even though I don't understand how it works, what the selection process is, or the outcome, I do believe that reincarnation is a thing. And then in when we were talking before the show, fascinating because this is what your book is about. You said you don't.
I don't logically believe in reincarnation. I don't spiritually believe in reincarnation, but uh, I cannot deny the irrefutable evidence before me that has been presenting itself to me over the entire course of my life since I can remember
Mhm.
things that has pointed toward my past life existence. And again, it was before the internet existed, when to do research on something would require you going to a library where you
And
would
getting
have to,
very outdated information.
yeah, but there just wasn't information available the way that there is now. And I went on this amazing journey, and I knew that I was fascinated with maritime disasters, especially of the ocean liner variety. And I knew this when I basically had a out of body experience seeing the Poseidon Adventure when I was 8 years old, and that was the seeing the film was life changing for me, and it led me to the experience of realizing I was reincarnated from a passenger on the Titanic. Now, I always laugh when people say, "Oh yes, I was Cleopatra in a past life. Oh, I was one of Henry VIII's wives in a past life." No, I was not Molly Brown. I was not. I was not Captain Smith. I was nobody noteworthy. I was a first class passenger that most people would never have heard of. He was never significantly dramatized in a film, but I knew that I was this fellow, and a very detailed series over the course of decades of evidence proved that to me. And when I wanted to write this into some kind of memoir, because, and it was obviously for Titanic fans, I happened to co host a podcast called Titanic Talk, where we talk to Titanic aficionados, historians, fans, whatever. As long as you have a unique Titanic story, we want to talk to you. So I was like, it's time for me to put my reincarnation story into book form. The Raindrops books were out, so I talked to my publisher about it, and I said, I'll tell the story and how it unfolded over the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and into today. And he said, well, Nelson, that sounds very interesting, but you just did the Raindrops books, which took us through your life in the 80s and the 90s, and I would prefer you write a book that's set in today and not a book that takes us, through the 80s and 90s again. And I thought, well, this is an interesting challenge. So it can't be my story. It has to be my story, but fictionalized. And, as I said, I'm a 61-year-old man, and they assigned me this brilliant 30-year-old editor who is his specialty is in fantasy. He knew nothing about the Titanic, but but he was an expert in the fantasy genre, which was new to me. I had many ideas of how to do this, and boy, what a gift was my editor, because he explained to me the rules of fantasy writing. If you're going to create a world, then there need to be a steadfast set of rules in that world from which you cannot
Yes.
stray. So I learned so much while just telling the story that I knew so intimately, plus the character of me and of my past life human. Uh, they were both 29 years old. And my editor being 30, helped me bridge the generation gap, because I take great pride in, like, oh yeah, I can write dialogue, and I know how to think like a 30-year-old. But there are some marked differences between thinking you're feeling 30 and actually being 30. So he was
Very,
a
very
great
true.
help in getting me to bridge the generation gap, and I'm very proud of the book, Kindred Spirits: A Titanic Tale, because it really does tell my story and the story of Milton Long, who I always felt that Milton's life was cut short, and with the constraints of Edwardian society, he didn't get to live his life. My life just began at 29. And I feel like maybe I, in some metaphysical way, picked up the baton for Milton. And that's basically the story. It's an odd couple story. Uh, we're two different souls in one body, helping
Right.
each other navigate a mystery as it relates to the Titanic. So there's a little bit of everything. There's history, there's fantasy, there is a ghost story and a mystery, and the metaphysical aspect. And spoiler alert, lots and lots of sex.
On the Titanic,
Well,
I'm
not on the
shocked.
Titanic, but I'm not saying there wasn't a little bit of that either. I mean, can you imagine
Yeah.
if Grinder had been around on the Titanic?
Well, and you know what you did though, don't you?
What did I do?
You said yes.
Oh,
You
yeah,
said yes to your publisher,
that's
and they
right.
got you an editor, and it brought you to another wonderful point in your life.
Yeah, and now now I've got that under my belt, and it's quite amazing. I've been a little bit of a player in the Titanic community for the last year and a half because of the podcast. We have a hell of a good time with Titanic Talk. But
Yeah.
we sort of thought, okay, it's run its life. We did, I don't know, 40, 45 episodes. That's enough. On to the next thing. But then my co-host has a Titanic themed documentary. I've got the Titanic themed book. So I was like, well, let's do a season 3. And I'm going to be going off to Belfast, where the Titanic was
Nice.
built,
Hmm.
doing events at the Titanic Museum. I'm going to be going around to Titanic exhibitions. So if you had told me when I was 20, 30, 40, or 50, hey, you're gonna finish out your retirement years doing what you love about the Titanic and ocean liners. I just got back from Cunard, just had launched their newest liner, the Queen Anne, and I was invited to be a guest speaker on a 4-day leg of the journey. So I got to be on the maiden voyage for free. I didn't have to pay for it. I got to go. I was invited to
Wow.
speak on the Queen Anne, and it was spectacular. And that's just another say yes to it. Just say yes.
Well, I don't know if you know, but I think it was 2001 was the first time I went to Vegas. And I was living in Phoenix and we flew up there. And our shuttle driver to the hotel was telling us that there was a plan at the time that they were working on
Yep.
building a Titanic themed hotel. It was going to be 6,000 rooms. And I thought, why though? I mean, why would you take something that ended horribly and then make something that's kind of a destination place for parties? And that seemed a little bit weird to me. What's your take on
We
that?
talk about this quite often on our podcast, because you can't imagine that level of romanticism around the Challenger disaster or a tsunami disaster or 9/11, or
Right.
just horrific global tragedies don't get romanticized the way that the Titanic tragedy has gotten romanticized. And you know, the answer may never eventuate, except that it was the end of an era of innocence. And the themes are constant in that, the man's power over nature, that we were going to have this unsinkable ship and we're such titans of industry that nothing can touch us. And there was such class division and the hubris of, okay, the very wealthy haves versus the have-nots, and it was the immigrant have-nots that really supported the shipping industry. If it
Right.
weren't for the
Yeah.
immigrant trade, the Astors wouldn't have been traveling in such style. But really, things aren't so different. And we were smack dab in the middle of our podcast season one or season two, when the Titan submersible imploded on its way down to the wreck.
Mhm.
And suddenly I became very sought after in the media to talk about that. And
Sure.
my take on it was, Titanic killed a bunch of people a century ago, and it's killing people again because of this. And it was the same theme. It was man's power over technology and nature. We're going to get in this little tin can and descend down to the bottom of the ocean, and we think we can do it. And those of you that are wealthy enough to be able to go on this submersible will get to go. And it's horrible. I mean, it's hubris, and there was certainly nothing that you could romanticize about the Titans uh,
Yeah.
end. But I don't know. Maybe Hollywood has a part to do with it. There was a silent film star who was a passenger on the Titanic, and as soon as she survived, and as soon as she got home, they made a movie. She wore the clothes she was rescued in, and they made like a short film about her Titanic experience. So from the
Wow.
very beginning, uh, people have been captivated. Well, obviously we didn't have newsreels, so there are just some strange black and white photos of the people getting off the ship when they were rescued, and a couple of photos of the lifeboats being brought to the Carpathia. So, never having been able to see it, we saw 9/11, we saw the Challenger, we saw the tsunami, but we didn't see the Titanic. We needed
Mhm.
Hollywood to show us the Titanic.
Right.
And that, of course, Hollywood always has to add a love story, whether it's Barbara Stanwyck in her version, or Honor Blackman in her version, or Kate and Leo in their version.
Right. I have to think, had this happened more recently, like in modern times, how many people would have died not being helped because people were too busy taking pictures in movies?
Or, the whole code of honors. I mean, famously, there weren't enough lifeboats for all the passengers. However, many of the lifeboats were not filled to capacity because there
Right.
was this women and children only mentality. They said women
Mhm.
and children first, but in many cases it was women and children only because the men, uh, the we can't understand it today, but the Edwardian sense of decorum and that a man would take the place over a woman was unheard of, and they would live in shame and guilt for surviving. And
Right.
what's fascinating is how many of the, especially male, Titanic survivors died badly later, not long after they were rescued from
Right.
Titanic, because of the survivor's guilt, the
Mhm.
despair, to live through something like that. So I get into that in the book as well, because my past life as Milton, he was very close to another man on the ship, and Milton did not survive, and the other man did, and that man would go on to have a wife and family, but ultimately take his own life, uh,
Mhm.
just because he never got over the Titanic.
And that's the stuff that they really don't talk about. You're right. You hear about the romanticized part of it. You hear about, the way that Hollywood portrayed it in the film, and you hear about the theories of what actually happened, but they don't really go into too much, other than Molly Brown, I would say. And I've been to the Molly Brown house, which was an
Mm-hmm.
interesting day, but you really don't hear about the aftermath. And I'm one of those people that can watch a horror movie and go, okay, I see how it ended. All your friends are dead. That really sucks. What do you do tomorrow? When you wake up, do you go back to school? Do you go find a job? Like, what's your future like? And I always get curious at the end of a movie. And I would feel the same about these people, but we don't get those stories.
Well, in my book, you get the story. You find out a lot about the aftermath, because I give my two protagonists a mystery to unravel. They've got to find out whatever happened to the man who survived, and it wasn't a happy ending, but in the way they solved the mystery together as a team. The
Mhm.
two of them in one body is kind of fun. It's a fun adventure that they have, and speaking of horror movies and what do they do at the day after, that made me think of Amy Irving in Carrie, because spoiler alert, at the end of Carrie, the last scene of Carrie is Amy Irving's aftermath.
Right.
So that there's one exception there with Amy
Mhm.
Irving. Here's my entertainment reporter trivia for you. Amy Irving, who got the one of the highest divorce settlements in Hollywood history from Steven Spielberg, and her mother, Priscilla Pointer, the wonderful actress Priscilla
Mhm.
Pointer, played her mother in Carrie. So
That's right. Yeah. Boy, what and there's no version of that movie that ends well, by the way. No matter how many times they remake that, it's never going to be a happy ending.
I saw the
Uh,
remake with Chloe Marie. What's her name?
Chloe Grace Moretz,
Yeah,
yeah.
I saw her in the remake. It was good, but it wasn't Carrie.
When you have something that's that iconic, and you could look at, movies, you can look at bands covering, like a Beatles song, you really have to bring something pretty amazing in the story to make it stand on its own without comparison to the original.
Well, you can go off, do you want to talk about Barbara Stanwyck's Titanic or Kate Winslet's Titanic or Night to Remember
Exactly.
or whatever? And I will say, my, you know, guilty pleasure favorite movie of all time being the Poseidon Adventure. And if I had a drink, I would pull up my pant leg and show you the enormous Poseidon tattoo that I have on my leg. Um, but the Poseidon Adventure, they tried to remake it as a TV movie with Rutger Hauer and C. Thomas Howell, and then Wolfgang Peterson made the big budget remake. And I interviewed Wolfgang and the cast for that, and it was nothing like the Poseidon Adventure, other than the fact that it was an ocean liner capsized by a tidal wave. And
Right.
Wolfgang, who's so talented as a director, as he was talking to me and saying about, well, in our film, the ship is a character. And I thought, well, that means it's going to be great. And it just wasn't. The special effects were great, but
Yeah.
it had no heart, and the ship did not seem like a character. And that's another thing that people love about the Titanic. I mean, the sight of the Titanic is indelible. Many cruise ships now, they all look the same, or they've got some weird pink and yellow water slide for the kids running down. What the hell is that? But the Titanic has such a distinct personality.
Yeah. Well, and it was so expensive, it's not like they could be duplicating that thing left and right either.
Yeah, and I'm glad they didn't do the hotel. There's, there are plenty of Titanic attractions you can visit. I don't know
Yeah.
that I'd want to. I don't know. I'm glad
Yeah,
it didn't
because well,
happen.
because if it would have been successful, then they would have done the Hindenburg, and then I mean, like, where would it end?
No
Uh, so,
smoking.
s-
No
no.
smoking at the Hindenburg.
Since the book hasn't come out, of course, I haven't read it, so I don't know all the details of it. Do you get into and I don't want you to spoil anything. If you don't want to answer this, that's absolutely fine.
By the
But
time
do you
this
get
airs,
in?
by the time we play this podcast, it will be out. So
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
yeah.
Do you get into whether, like, your theories on what actually happened to the Titanic itself, like what caused the disaster, or do you shy away from it? It's really
No,
just a
this is
story.
one man's story of the Titanic, and without giving too much away, and you will also get a look at what could have been had the Titanic not met with disaster. So
Okay.
there are we always, no matter how happy we are, we always talk about the what ifs. So
Right.
Milton does get the satisfaction of his what if.
Hmm. This is going to be really interesting. I'm really excited to read
Yeah,
this.
it's fun it's fun even for casual Titanic fans, because
Mhm.
uh, you're getting to rub elbows a little bit with Molly Brown, John Jacob Astor,
Yeah.
the famous characters of the true story. But then in the contemporary modern Manhattan, I use a lot of my Titanic colleagues are part of the story. And it takes place in real places in New York City now. It unfolds over the course of the end of 2024 and beginning of 2025. So it's a very contemporary tale with all of these Titanic uh, sliding doors.
You know, it's interesting. You brought up the sub, and I'm thinking like this was something we were fascinated with, and then that kind of man's arrogance turned to space. And the only reason that we haven't had people, I think, meet the same kind of tragedy in space is because it's not viable for your average citizen to travel into space and go see the space station or the moon or whatever yet. But it seems like, the Titanic was the thing because that was the biggest thing of the day,
Yes.
and we hadn't gone to space yet. And I'm worried that that might be a path that we take in the future because that seems like a logical progression for man to take.
Agreed. Well, isn't Elon Musk planning us to go to Mars next? Isn't that the plan?
Yeah. Well, until they start putting up, convenience stores and hotels and stuff, there's really no reason to go.
Yeah,
And
I'm not.
water
I'm not.
slides
I'm
because we're
not
going to
putting
do
my
that.
hand. I say yes to a lot of things, but that's not one of them. I'm not going into
There you go.
space.
So since this isn't your first book that you've put out, you're an experienced author. Are you at the point now where you're able to finish a book, put it out there, and be done with it, apart from the promotion and all that? But as far as like letting go of the creative and saying, I wrote it, it is the way it is, and that's that? Or do you go back and go, you know what, though? I kind of wish I hadn't done this, or I wish I had put this in there.
Oh, I don't. I don't have any regrets about anything, but I. It is tough to let something go. And when I did Dancing Between the Raindrops, that was my story of New York in the '80s,
Mhm.
and I I felt compelled to do the sequel because that was just 10 years of my life. I still had a really fun 20 years to examine of Los Angeles years. And there will be later in 2025 the third installment. It's already written. I just need to have it edited properly.
Oh, okay.
But it'll be Dancing Between the Raindrops, Happily Ever After, which chronicles the coming back. And those books, Jackie Collins was another mentor of mine. I spent a lot of time with Jackie Collins, and also, in addition to being charmed by her as a woman, uh, impressed by her as a business person, and she taught me so much about the business of being an author. She was never afraid to have a case of books in the trunk of her car. And,
Mhm.
and to get her hands dirty with a dollar bill to sell a book. She'd buy you lunch, but if you wanted a book, it was going to cost you. She would never
Yeah.
give away a book. So I
Mhm.
learned a lot about that from her. But yeah, so what's interesting with the Dancing Between the Raindrops is now we're recording the audiobooks. So they never really go away. And then
That's
eventually
true.
when the audiobook's ready, I'll be able to promote that. So I can just keep going back and visiting them, like seeing your kids on the holidays. You get to
Right.
visit with them. And some book I wrote 20 years ago when I was trying to sell it as a screenplay in Hollywood. It's really good. And I gave it to the editor of Kindred Spirits. I said, take a look at this. Maybe it's time to, now that I'm a grown up, maybe it's time to revisit this and properly write it.
Mhm.
So yeah, nothing's ever gone forever. As
That's
long as you're here, nothing's ever gone forever.
very, very true. So then can we expect an audiobook version of this, Kindred Spirits?
Eventually, yes, I've got to get through two more Dancing Between the Raindrops, and who knows what else is out there. And I really do have to. I confess I do have to take a Xanax before I go to bed. Not in the morning. Like I can get through the whole day without any tension, but getting through the night without having ideas, and I get all this anxiety. Like I got to write it down. I got to write it down. Don't let me forget this. And I really just, that's when I need to switch off. Otherwise, I just don't sleep much anyway. But that's
Yeah.
that's my problem.
Oh,
Ideas,
okay.
ideas,
That
ideas.
that I can help you with. I used to have
Sleeping,
that problem
or I
too.
thought you were going to hook me up with some Xanax.
No, no, the pharmacy's not here, but I can help you with that. What I started doing, because I had that same problem, and years ago, I just put a notebook and a pencil on the side table to my bed, and anytime I would wake up, I would just write down my idea, so I wouldn't have to worry about remembering it or remembering details. I no longer do that now. I just do it in a voice message or a text message to myself. I'll wake up, roll over, there's the phone. It's out of my head. I know it's documented somewhere that I can easily access it. And then I'll transfer it in the morning wherever it needs to go, whatever, project folder or
The
notebook it needs
irony,
to
though,
be in.
Scott, the irony is that it's never really that good. Like for me anyway, it's never really that good. Like you wake up and you go, I was tossing and turning for this.
Well, but it's not about that. It's about just getting it out of your head so you can relax.
I'm a very avid runner, and that's when I get my best thinking is
Mm,
running. That's when it all
yeah.
comes to me.
Yep, I can understand that. Because your mind is at ease. You're kind of open. You're not really focused on anything other than just your run.
Well, and I don't run with music. I don't run with a phone. I just put on my sneakers and off I go.
Good
Um,
for you.
I used to always like I do keep track of all my mileage, but now I know my routes around New York City. So I'll only
Right.
wear a watch if I'm in a strange place and I want to calculate my mileage. But I know my body well enough to know how far I'm going.
Well, that's very wise. And the repetition of it too, it becomes just kind of a, you don't even need to think about anything after a while. Even my walks down the strip after the first year or so, I had every hotel memorized, every door, every elevator, escalator, you name it. And I could just go and not think about anything, just enjoy the beauty of the architecture or, the weather or whatever it was.
Do you ever wonder if because I do I stare, as I said, I stare at people, but I'll be on the subway or I'll be out for a run, and I feel as if I notice everything. I feel like, gosh, I notice more than the average person. I really see everything. But then I wonder if I had to be a witness, if something terrible happened and the police needed me to be a witness, would I be able to recall? That's sometimes when
Hmm.
I'm noticing things, I try and hyper notice them as if I had to give testimony.
Right. That's interesting. I would think for you, because of your journalistic experience, I think that your senses would typically be heightened if something happened. Your eyes would just instinctively know where to go. You would know what to pay attention to, and you would recall maybe not all the details, but a good majority of them.
Yeah.
For me, I think it would really depend on the situation. If we're talking gunshots, would my body just go for cover? Having been shot at before, I would say I
Oh.
know I wouldn't. I would do something really stupid and run towards it to try and save somebody, or do something stupid like that because that's what I did last time. It depends on the situation, but I think for you, I think your skills are embedded and they would
Huh.
just kick in.
I from all the years of having to memorize scripts and lines to present on camera, I have a very photographic memory in that like once I've if I need to learn something, if I write it out on a page or even just type it out and print the page, like I remember things, I can memorize things visually, and I can see the paragraphs where the page breaks are. I just that's how I memorize things, but then it goes right out of my head. I have no retention, and
Yeah.
it's like I speed read. I actually, as a kid, my parents sent me to Evelyn Wood Speed Reading Academy. Does that ring a
Wow.
bell?
I
And
have heard of that. Yeah.
you'd see the commercials and the people would be reading with their fingers going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth across
Mhm.
the page. But it really made a lot of sense, and it was very helpful to me because I'm a voracious reader and I can read super fast. Like I can knock out a novel a day if I want to. Yeah, but I
Mhm.
also like to slow down sometimes and savor a book. But the theory is you drag your finger down the middle of the page, and rather than reading a word at a time, you use your peripheral vision to read a sentence at a time. The most important
Okay.
sentence of any paragraph is the first sentence, the topic
Right.
sentence. So
Hmm.
if you read the topic sentence and then use your peripheral vision to move to see a sentence at a time, that's the key to speed reading, and it does work if you have the wherewithal to do it. Because when you see the word cat, you don't see cat, you see cat. And it's the
Right.
same theory when you're reading a sentence at a time as opposed to a word at a time.
Do you really get to enjoy it though if you're doing it that
Well,
way?
as
I
I
mean,
said, if I'm loving a book and don't want it to end, you can slow it down. You don't have to do it that way. But there were one of my many survival jobs was doing script coverage for a production company, and they'd like read this
oh,
script or read this book, and then I did um, abridgments for books on tape. I did an abridgment of Dune, which is not a short
wow.
book, and but
No.
they wanted it to be abridged, and that's when speed reading really helps.
Wow. Yeah, I think one of the longest ones that I'm aware of, I think the Fountainhead was like
Oh,
82
and Rand, yeah.
hours. Yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine the how long it took, the patience it takes, and how was that voice I did 3 months ago? You know, just trying to recall for the consistency. Not like the person that's listening is even going to remember what it was, but that's I used to direct and edit audiobooks, so I have an appreciation for that process,
Well,
and
now
yeah, it's interesting.
they encourage the literary world now encourages the use of AI for that very purpose. You can put out to me that's they talk to me about that, and I'm like, no way, and I don't want anybody reading my book but me. It's exhausting, but it's worth it. And the AI, I was like, what? Oh, you can choose male or female. And they push the button. And I'm like, well, that's not very politically correct if those are my only two choices. And
Right. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there's no inflection. And I just that's not for me.
I I think someday that will sadly be the majority. I mean, they're already doing it on YouTube videos
Yeah.
and that kind of stuff, but
I'm more worried that they'll
it's
use AI
obvious.
to write the books. I don't, I'm less worried about who's reading the books than I am about who's writing them. Because
If it
that's
makes you
another thing. Like
feel,
AI could
yeah.
probably, outright us all. Yeah.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I had a friend who just posted yesterday. They were talking to one of the AI chatbots about something, and the chatbot said, "Why don't you give me a call and we can discuss this in more detail?" And they responded with, "I didn't know you could make phone calls." And it said, "Oh, I forgot. Sometimes I can't do those things." I'm like, "We're not there yet."
Crazy. It's a new
Well,
world.
I can't believe how fast this hour has gone by. Thank you so much for your time, Nelson. The book comes out, is it the
It's out.
13th?
It's out, baby.
Oh, it's out now?
It actually it literally came out today, unexpectedly ahead of schedule. So
Oh,
literally about 2 hours ago.
oh, no kidding. Okay, well, Kindred Spirits, a Titanic Tale. I will have the link in the show notes for you guys. Please check it out. And also look for the audiobook, because even when you read a book, if you get to hear the author read the book as well, and it really gives a different depth and emotional state and appreciation for it. So I like to read the book, but if I can get a hold of the audiobook when the actual author has read it, it's a different joy for me.
I'll get to it as fast as I can, but
Oh,
it'll
I'm
be
sure
a
you will. I'm
while.
sure you will. Thank you so much, Nelson. I really appreciate your time. It's been a pleasure, and I wish you just the greatest success with the book.
Scott, you're a good man. I had fun. Thank you so much for your hospitality.
My pleasure. Thank you. We'll see you soon. You guys have a great day. Thank you for tuning in to this special episode of the Haskincast podcast. Cheers.